I'll be talking to you guys about a project that I spent about 2 years working on for the Port of Detroit. Essentially, we put together a decarbonization plan that I think is going to be a really similar case study to what the Corn Belt Ports decarbonization plan from the funding from the EPA Clean Ports Grant could look like. So I hope that this presentation can give you guys an idea of what that end result and that process could look like. Detroit is historically known for being the motor city. It's a huge industrial city that has like a deep root, especially in the automotive industry. But I think one thing that people don't often know about this is the reason that the motor city and the automotive industry was able to come up out of the city of Detroit is really based on the geography of the city. Detroit is located on the river, the Detroit River, and it ties into the rest of the Great Lakes system. And so it really was this proximity to the waterways and the ability to utilize the maritime industry that enabled the motor city to exist. One other thing to note is that the Port of Detroit itself is not one like small, combined port. It's actually a pretty spread out port along the Detroit River and the River Rouge. And so it's more like a collection of terminals than it is one consolidated terminal or one consolidated port. So I think it mirrors Corn Belt ports. Obviously, there are many more terminals in the Corn Belt region, and it's over a wider area. But the Detroit River is essentially a pretty similar geographic setup as well. The full name of the project that we worked on is the Port of Detroit Decarbonisation and Air Quality Improvement Project. And the real heart of why the Port Authority decided to take on this work was really this connection between heavy industry and air pollution. This high concentration of heavy industry often leads to a high concentration of air pollution. And there are a lot of studies that are done that show this correlation between air pollution and chronic exposure to it and negative health outcomes, especially respiratory illnesses like asthma. And so really the heart of this project was to be able to contextualize and understand what impact does the Port of Detroit and these terminals have on the health of the environment and also the health of the community. So essentially this is a map of the Port of Detroit region. The Detroit River is this thicker region, the thicker river, and then over here you can see a smaller river that kind of goes inland. That's called the River Rouge. The Port of Detroit is essentially a collection of 24 different entities that exist along these two rivers, probably span 6 to 8 miles for the whole port itself. This is kind of a graphic of like my thought process of the data collection. So essentially in the Port of Detroit, they mainly do imports. So you have a vessel that comes into the Port of Detroit. There's emissions associated with the burning of that diesel or heavy fuel oil. The vessel does some unloading, whether with a self-unloader or some sort of crane or onshore equipment that then unloads the vessels. So there's some emissions tied into that. You might move your goods around on site to put them in different storage facilities. And then also there's going to be a movement of goods from the facility once it leaves that industrial location to the customer. So we included any transportation, which we are bucketing as drayage, within Wayne County to understand what are the emissions associated with drayage within the local Detroit context. The most emissions were found in this drayage category. As we learned earlier, shipping per ton has the lowest carbon emissions as a form of transport as compared to rail, and then truck being a higher emissions per ton. So it is really valuable to move products on the water. It saves in costs often as you're able to move a bulk amount of product, but it also saves on carbon. One really key outcome of this study was putting together this group that we called the Low Carbon Port Committee. Essentially, this is an opportunity for the most engaged terminals to opt in and just connect on topics of sustainability, thinking about challenges around reducing their carbon emissions. And so we have a quarterly meeting where these terminals come together and are able to become more educated, bring their challenges, and problem solve together. So that's been a really successful piece of this project, and I think something that you guys all do really well here in Corn Belt. And then the last outcome is we are doing re-audits for the Port of Detroit, and every 2 years we're recalculating the emissions within the same scope that we defined to see how these emissions change over time, to essentially track progress and see how the port is moving in reaching their net zero targets. On the topic of re-audits, we did a re-audit for them for the 2024 season, and you'll see that it came in slightly below the 30,000 tons. They didn't necessarily implement any new electric technology or things like this, so I think it's probably just a change in tonnage. But I really anticipate there to be a real tangible reduction for the next re-audit.
So they emit about 30,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalents in a given year. And for those of you who are NFL fans, you might like this analogy, but essentially if you put together all of the emissions, the total molecules of carbon dioxide, if you squish them together with no air between them, essentially you'll have about 40 NFL stadiums, 40 Ford fields filled of carbon dioxide.
What is the goal as far as reducing those emissions?
Yeah, so the goal and the pathway to reduce those emissions is going to be a combination of different technologies. The goal is to reach zero by 2040, and this will be done through starting with biofuels to reduce diesel usage and hopefully to move towards electrification and other low carbon fuel technologies as those technologies evolve.